My talk is about 10 rules to build the next great esport game. In order to give you a little bit of context as to what happened to me in the past few years and justify and explain how I came up with these principles, I'll have to tell you a little bit about myself first, and then we'll move on into the core of the presentation. The city you see here is Trieste. It's an Italian city in the northeast. It's a beautiful, beautiful city, but when I grew up, it was boring AF, and there was not a lot to do. Today, it's very exciting. I recommend anybody who goes to Italy to visit it, but back then, it was really not that interesting. So I played a lot of games. I played a lot of role-play games, Dungeons & Dragons, Shadowrun, Call of Cthulhu. And when Magic the Gathering came around, I, together with that first generation of role-play game players, jumped on it, and that's how I spent years of my life. I started traveling around North Italy, and there was an organic, grassroots, competitive ecosystem that was being built by hobby game stores and tournament organizers. So every Sunday, we would go to Milan, to Bologna, to Rome, to a different city in Italy, and play in these big Magic tournaments. Turned out I was pretty good, and by 1996, I was the top-ranked player in the country at the end of the season. Wizards of the Coast started inviting me to go to professional tournaments, actual tournaments with money, with cash prize in it. And I started traveling around Europe, North America, Asia, and it turns out I sucked. Turns out that while I was pretty good in my country, I had found my cap, right? Like everybody at those tournaments was just much better at it than I was. And you know what, like you can try to persevere, or you can understand that you're just not smart enough. And I got it, I got the message. And so what I did, and I'll take it as like the lesson there, right? Like you should persevere. But what happened was that Wizards of the Coast opened in Milan. And so I moved to Milan and became the first employee of the company there. And they gave me 1 week of sales training, a car, a cell phone, and they said, go. And I went around northern Italy trying to sell these Magic cards. Turns out that 1998 was a rough year for Magic. A new expansion had come out that had not really worked out with the players. And all these stores had a lot of unsold Magic in the back, and they were asking me, can you get rid of this stuff before you want me to buy the next expansion? I didn't have a way, and so they would show me the door. So what I did was the only thing I knew how to do, which was, I'm going to come here and organize tournaments for you. I'm going to, if you can't set up tables and chairs, I'm going to invite all my friends that I know from your town. They're going to come here. They're going to play the game in your store, and we're going to start building a community for you. And some stores that said yes. So I would run tournaments on Saturdays and Sundays, teach local players how to run tournaments themselves, and then move on to the next city. And little bit, month by month, me and the other sales folks managed to rebuild the competitive ecosystem in the country. And all of a sudden, a lot of activity, a lot of sales started pouring in. Wizards of the Coast Italy became the second country in the world for activity and sales. And so at that point, I got an offer from Seattle, from the headquarters in Washington, to move up and take over the programs team for organized play. Organized play, you can think of it in terms of the unit that was delivering the programs for competitive systems for Magic the Gathering and other games. So I moved to Seattle in 2003, picked up that team, and we spent the following 7 years developing competitive systems for Magic, for Pokemon, for Harry Potter, for sports games that Wizards of the Coast published at the time. It was very fun, but it was also clear at some point that the future for Wizards of the Coast needed to be digital. And so at that point, we moved on to pitched to Hasbro the notion that a number of our initiative needed to explore moving Magic, Dungeons & Dragons into the digital space. We did a number of things between 2007 and 2010. Some of them worked, some of them didn't. But I think it set the stage for the Wizards of the Coast that exists today. And in 2010, in particular, I got an offer from Blizzard Entertainment to move to Irvine. and picked up the community and esports team for Blizzard. So I moved to Irvine, and I found a rockstar community team that I have had the privilege to work with, and I still remember as an amazing team. And I picked up also esports, and esports was two great, very talented teammates that were tasked with processing the legal rights that tournament organizers globally needed to receive in order to be able to process StarCraft tournament, to run StarCraft tournaments. I thought at the time that Blizzard needed to play a different role in the space, and I found a lot of momentum in the leadership of the company. Mike Morheim was an amazing fan of esports and always loved the community. And so when I pitched the World Championship Series for StarCraft 2, it was probably the easiest approval process I have ever went through. We, as a team, put together a set of 30 events that we deployed globally, from qualifiers, nationals, regional championship, and a global final. And that set the stage for the Blizzard you know today in terms of their investment in the ecosystem and developing competitive play as an active player, right? After that, the next step has been Riot Games. In 2012, Riot called and they asked me to join as the head of community for League of Legends. I moved to Los Angeles, and that's when I found an amazing esports team that was already at the bleeding edge of delivering player experiences that were above the bar of what the world had seen. And so I instead focused on the community side and on the grassroots competitive play. I had already started a collegiate program at Blizzard for StarCraft and viewing parties. And so we did the same for League of Legends and kicked off a fairly extensive collegiate program and a sanctioned tournament program that was designed to support individual organizers for League of Legends that just had the passion and the initiative to put together players and get them in the competitive scene. It was a very fun time. And then the last step is where I'm doing today. In 2015, Amazon called, and the Amazon Games team is designing new games. They wanted for somebody to come in and help build the department that runs esports and community for each one of the games. So this has been 25 years of adventures in which I felt a little bit like a Forrest Gump that ended up by chance and by luck and by good fortune to participate in some of the moments that the delivered modern competitive game in the scene that we know today. In the last 3 years, a bulk of my job has been to help new young professionals in the space to learn the basics of community, basics of esports, and start arming the game teams we have with both the strategy and the tactics that we will deploy once the games launch. And in the meantime, I had the opportunity to just reflect on the fact that I've collected enough material in these years that I should be sharing it a little bit with the rest of the industry, and that's what this presentation is about. So now we can get to the core of what this is about, which is the 10 rules or principles or ideas to build the next great esports game. So one of the not so hidden secrets of the success of Amazon has been the obsession with the customer. This is not just something that is written on our boards around the Amazon buildings in Seattle. This is something that everybody at Amazon deeply feels as the secret of the success of the company. The only way to go for Amazon is to start with the customer and work backwards and understand what the customer experience is and only deliver things that are resonant with the needs that are reflected by that experience. We're not competitor obsessed, we are customer obsessed. We start with the customer and work backwards. The interesting thing when you apply this to games is the following. When you think about the player experience, obviously at the core is the game. Obviously at the core, there is the idea that there needs to be a very compelling, superior experience that people want to opt in. But what happens is that in the modern age of gaming, there's an entire set of other experiences that your gamer is going to be touched by. So whenever you your players are going to be watching a stream on Twitch, whenever they're discussing the game on Reddit, whenever they are choosing to incarnate your IP in with amazing craft in cosplaying your game, or whether they are watching or participating in an esport competition, your players are exposed to way more than just your game and to an entire lifestyle that comes with it, especially obviously if you're successful with your game. So reflecting on what it means to start with the player experience and work backwards, the number one invite that I have for you is when you're designing and creating your game to arm yourself and your company with the ability to affect every aspect of the player experience. Clearly the game comes first, but you should not neglect designing for everything else. You should not think of metagame design and call metagame everything that is not the game. You should treat the metagame design with the same respect that you use when you design the game itself. And there's, in this day and age, a toolkit available to you as a developer to affect every aspect of the player experience. So there's no more excuse to just say, no, you know what, I'm just going to make a game and the ecosystem will take care of itself. And we'll see later what the price to pay is if you choose to go that route. Rule number 2 is build games as a service, or gas engine, right, as we call them. So the basic principle here is, in order to justify an ongoing investment in esports, which means constant, like you cannot just pay a bunch of money and then it happens and then you're done. It's going to be an ongoing investment. And so it's really hard to justify that investment if you cannot tie that investment directly to a revenue-generating engine that is typical of games as a service. So when you create new content, you generate sustained engagement, which in turn justify a continuous revenue stream, which in turn justify another investment in new content. That's the virtuous cycle you need to get into. And if you switch new content with esports, that's exactly the logic you should be embracing. You should be thinking about, how do I rationalize the ROI of investment in esports by continuously being able to directly attach revenue to the generation of that player experience. We'll see a little more later how that plays out. Rule number 3 is make it fun to watch. We'll spend a lot of time on this slide and on what that means. So at Amazon Games, we wanted to go a little deeper on what that means. What could we tell our game teams of how to prioritize features, what to look for in order to make that game fun to watch. And so we did actual research. We did a bunch of focus groups. We brought a bunch of people in, and we asked them a bunch of questions. The basic principle was we would bring somebody in, we would have them watch a number of known games, and we would do that with commentators, without commentators, and we would do that with players that knew the game in advance or were completely unfamiliar with the game, just to have control groups that would allow us to isolate the factors that would generate the fun to watch aspect. As we were going through this list, we started with 20 principles, and then we pare it down to 11 that I'm going to run through right now. Understanding gameplay goals. As a viewer, do I understand what the players are trying to accomplish? Viewer competence. How much do I need to know the game in order to be able to appreciate the action? Anticipation. This is the minute-by-minute ability to predict what's going to happen next in the game. Tension. Is there any form of tension in the game? Am I able to read that tension by just looking at the screen? Predictability. This is different than anticipation. Anticipation is the minute-by-minute element factor. Predictability is, at any given point in the match, do I understand who is winning? Do I understand who is going to take the match home? asymmetrical knowledge. This comes into play when the viewer has a different understanding and comprehension of what's happening in the game than the player. And normally it's a superior understanding. You can think of it in terms of fog of war that happens for the player and doesn't happen for the viewer. Or the camera under a poker table, Texas Hold'em, in which the viewer knows what the plays are and the players don't. Skill versus luck. Those are two key factors in identifying whether a game is fun to watch because of the skill of the players. Am I able to detect skill? Can I separate by just watching the players that are not that good from the players that are good? And how does luck come into play? Am I able to detect and understand an episode of luck, and how does it influence my viewership experience? Chaos. Is the game just too chaotic for me to... Maybe I understand the game, maybe I played the game, but the game might be just too chaotic for me to follow the action. Too many things happening at the same time. Surprise. Is the game able to generate moments of surprise? Relatedness. Is there any element of the game that I emotionally connect to, that resonates with me? And autonomy. Autonomy is a new element that comes into play once you factor that on Twitch. You can get the actual viewers to participate in the action. Is there any level of autonomy you want to give to the users, either in terms of cheering, in terms of participating cosmetically to the game, or actually impacting the result of the game? How do we process all this stuff? So we decided to bucket all this stuff in 4 categories, and what I'm about to show you is how they ranked for us in terms of importance for our viewers. Number 4 out of 4 is you feel connected. How do you feel connected with a game? Is the principle of relatedness, right? There's a number of ways that can make you feel connected with a game. Number 1, you know the players, or you have some level of affinity for the players. You have some level of affinity for the caster that is talking. You just follow that caster, and whatever they're showing matters to you because you just connected with the caster. Or you can be connected with the game itself. I'm a League of Legends player. I probably have played 2,000 games with Anivia, and so which is one of the champions, is a giant ice bird. And whenever anybody plays Anivia, I automatically connect emotionally to that player, and I will root for them just because it's my champion. Number 3 is spectacle. Spectacle comes into play, or is the game attention grabbing, in other words, in a number of ways. Clearly, this is where your visuals, your audio come into play, and your ability to generate something that people have not seen before. It really matters. Whether it's the clash of 2 armies on StarCraft or a pentakill in League of Legends, those are all moments that generate spectacle and create those hypes in your viewers. You can imagine that those are the moments in which at a stadium everybody stands up and cheers. There's also other ways to celebrate spectacle. The voiceover of the pentakill, which happens when you wipe out by yourself the entire enemy team in League of Legends, there's a voiceover that shouts pentakill, and that amplifies the spectacle. So there's a number of tricks you can actually use to further the player experience. Suspense. Suspense is number 2 in terms of importance for you. And suspense, or is there tension of the game, is achieved normally through things like great matchmaking. Are you connecting players of equal skills? Because nobody wants to watch a match in which somebody is rolling over the opposite team or the opposite teams or players. Other examples of tensions that, if you ask anybody that plays battle royale games, they will tell you that tension is a big factor in the reason why they play that game. And there's a number of elements that cleverly have been developed by the publishers that do battle royale games. There's a number that goes down, and it tells you how many players are left on the map. There's the circle that is like becoming smaller and smaller, and you understand that you're just forced more and more to get out of your comfort zone and start dealing with the other players. All those are elements that you can introduce in your game to increase the amount of tension. The camera that I mentioned before for Texas Hold'em changed Texas Hold'em into a spectator sport. Until that camera was in play, that tension that you can detect with that asymmetrical knowledge that you have as a viewer was just not there. Now you know who's bluffing, you know who has the winning hand, and you can start predicting what's going to happen. It rises the level of tension by just a simple trick has changed poker forever. So there's a number of things you can do to amplify your suspense, but the number one thing that you should always care about is, can you understand what's going on? As per our research, really, if you can't understand what's going on, everything else kind of doesn't matter. And so solve for that first, and then you can worry about number 2, number 3, and number 4. There's a number of things, obviously, you can do for gameplay understanding. When I think about gameplay understanding, I point at Rocket League as the example of probably the easiest game to understand. If you've ever been exposed to soccer, you know everything that you need to know, and within 10 seconds of watching Rocket League, you have a sense of what's happening. There's a ball, there's 2 teams, they just happen to be cars, there's goals, there's 2 numbers that are going up, probably the scores, and then there's a timer is going down, and when the timer is over, the game is over. It takes 5 seconds to understand Rocket League. Now, obviously, you might not be that fortunate that you're creating a game as obvious as Rocket League, but there's still a lot of work that you can put in creating the legibility for the game. League of Legends is a super complicated game, and in particular, it was, for a long time, very hard to understand who's winning, like what team is winning. There's so many objectives and factors that impact the outcome of the game, and for the viewer, it's really hard to have no idea who's winning. So at some point, one breakthrough was just showing to the viewer the gold count. The total gold count of the 2 teams really changed and improved the viewership experience dramatically, because it was the best predictor of what team is going to win. It's not a perfect predictor, but it's just much better than everything else that there is at your disposal to read the game. You should also obviously consider automated spectator modes, right? Especially when the action on your game is happening in a variety of different places at the same time. The ability for a automated director to keep on bouncing back and forth where the action is happening just greatly improved the legibility of your game. At Riot, there is today, I believe still, a clarity team whose only job was to clarify the action, to change the color schemes, change the patterns, change the syntax of the game for a viewer experience. So when you're considering building a viewership experience for your game, the lesson number 3 is about, these are the factors that I recommended that you that you arm your game team with, and start with, can you understand what's going on, and then go down the line. Number 4, we talked about the viewership experience. I find that the video game industry has focused a lot, when you say esports, when we say esports in the video game industry, there seems to be a lot of focus on what's happening at the top of the competitive pyramid, like the viewership experience, professional players, and all that good stuff, which is paramount. It's really important, obviously, to build a sport. But that comes sometimes at the expense of understanding that any sport known to man has been built by delivering experiences at all levels of competition. So while you're building the viewership experience, your team should also be focusing on figuring out what the participatory experience of esports is. And as you build it, starting from the grassroots, mid-tier, challenger, and then pro, don't skip the phases. Don't ignore an entire chunk of your competitive ecosystem because you want to skip to the pros. I do believe it may be possible to build a competitive ecosystem starting from the pro down, but my inclination and my starting point, my default, if you will, is always build the grassroots first. Deploy a competitive ecosystem and support the grassroots first so that you are legitimized in delivering a professional scene as well. Once it's obvious that everybody is competing on your game, no player will push back and say, hey, you guys think you are an esport, but you're not, which is a critique that I've seen a lot on gaming forums. When I told you before about the World Championship Series for StarCraft 2, a lot of the vision behind that program was to give experiences to players outside of Korea. StarCraft has always been, at least it was in those years, eminently a Korean phenomenon that the rest of the world was invited to participate in. And what I wanted to do with the championship series was, can we take Korea sport and share it with the rest of the world? Can we create local heroes at all tiers of competition to get to a place where everybody feels they can compete? My personal experience as a Magic player that I told you before had room for me. I was not just player number 1 million in the world. I was the best player in my store. Then I was the best player in my city. And then I was the best player in my country. And then I hit a brick wall with the face. But until then, there was a lot for me. And I will remain a Magic player forever because Wizards of the Coast had something for me at every tier of competition. The other thing that I recommend you think about when you're developing your competitive systems is, as you start with the grassroots, build something that will reward everyone. Don't worry about too much the performance of these players, and build welcoming competitive systems that will allow players to overcome the fear of failure, that will allow people to say, well, I'm not participating in a league or a tournament because there's going to be public shame as soon as I show that I'm really not adequate for this. Wizards of the Coast has an amazing system to onboard people to competitive play. It's called the pre-release tournaments. Every expansion, when it comes out, normally 2 weeks earlier, there is a tournament that allows you as a player to see the cards for the first time and to buy a first small batch of those cards that are not released yet. But to do so, you need to participate in a tournament. And so going to a big game store and then playing with a stranger and then being formally humiliated in front of my peers is all an exercise that is hard for people to take, but people will take it because there's a prize at the end. And once they do that once and twice and 3 times, they find out that it's not a big deal. They find out that they like it. They find out that they found a community to connect to. And then they start joining Friday Night Magic. They show up every week. They play in tournaments, and it's no longer a high-tension competitive scene. It's more of a participatory social space where you happen to compete. And as you go up the chain and you become better and better and you find new goals for yourself, then performance starts mattering. And so by the time you get to the top of the pyramid, that's where, obviously, the shift changes. And the reward systems that you create should then switch to rewarding performance instead. So all of this to say, as you're developing the viewership experience, don't forget the participatory experience. Every sport known to man, from baseball to League of Legends to chess to bridge, has different tiers of competition, and you should be delivering against all your audience, not just a part of your audience. Rule number 5, test, listen, and test again. So at Amazon Games, we spend the last couple of years bringing in players all the time. As we are developing these games, we have professional players, tournament organizers, streamers, members of the community that have a lot to say about the type of games we should be building. And we brought them in under the NDA. We spend the days with them. We collect their feedback, and the game team takes their feedback deadly seriously. Like, our games have changed constantly because of the feedback we got from the players. When our Vice President, Mike Frazzini, presented Amazon Game Studios, he made the hypothesis that the time in which gamers are participating in not only in the creation of the content for a game, but in the design of a game, we feel that that mission is part of what defines Amazon Games. And in order to live by that vision, we're not only seeking help to design the game, we're seeking help to design the metagame. We're seeking help to design the competitive systems that will drive the metagame for the games we have developed. I invite you to do the same. Don't wait for the game to be over. to be launched. I mean, before you start inviting the community in, do it as soon as you feel comfortable that you have the core of a fun experience, and then start developing with them. There's the different degrees that you can bring the community in, and once you're out, once you have actually launched your game, then start deeply working with the ecosystem. What happens if you don't, right? What happens if you choose to work either against the ecosystem or ignore this ecosystem altogether? So I mentioned before, I've had the fortune to work with some of the companies that care about the ecosystem and work with the ecosystem the most and care about the player experience. But it was not always the case, and there were learning lessons along the way, right? So for example, at Blizzard, there were a number of things that happened in the ecosystem that before Blizzard was equipped to interact with that ecosystem and affect it and help it. Gold farming. Millions of dollars generated in a secondary market as a result of World of Warcraft's ecosystem developing in absence of the ability to impact it. Defense of the Ancient, a mod for Warcraft 3 that then became a full-size big-scale game in Asia, and then spawned an entire genre of MOBAs from Dota 2 to League of Legends to a new type of way of playing the games that were sparked by the original IP of Blizzard. And then, obviously, esports. In Korea, in the smoky internet cafes of Korea, that's where players were coming together, playing against each other, started creating tournaments, started becoming something that they would put on TV, and all of this happened mostly in absence of the publisher. So you can choose to ignore the ecosystem. The ecosystem will exist. If you are successful with your game, the ecosystem will exist whether you like it or not, and we'll go places. We'll do things. And so my invitation is don't do that. Participate in the ecosystem. So naturally, the next question would be, well, how do you participate in the ecosystem? My take is you should be trying to own the experience, but not the execution. And I'll try to explain what I mean with that. Whether you like it or not, the DNA of your organization will probably be about making games. If you're really enlightened organization, you will care about the full player experience, and you will have skill sets well beyond just building games. You will be able to deal with people as well as you deal with code. But before you're actually able to gain the level of proficiency that the ecosystem has today in managing a large-scale competitive program, it's probably going to take some time. When I built the WCS, I had 6 months to deliver 30 events globally. It's not something that is done, right? Unless you reach out to ESL, MLG, and DreamHack, and professional organizations that have already worked on this before, and professional teams that are there that want to get involved, and you work with them. And so we did it. Like in 6 months, we launched those 30 events because we chose to work with the ecosystem. But it was our experience. We designed the experience. We designed how the tournament worked. We designed the rules of every aspect of the event, the branding. We did well at a few things. We did badly at others, and the program definitely evolved in the years. But players knew what the World Championship Series was and what type of experience they were expecting, regardless of what part of the world they were in. Magic is generating every year hundreds of thousands of live events. Hundreds of thousands of live events. And if I walk into a Friday Night Magic store in Naples, in Tokyo, in Chicago, tomorrow, or whenever Friday is, in a couple of days, I know exactly what's going to happen to me. I know what I'm supposed to do. I'm showing up with a deck. I'm paying a tournament fee. I participate in an event that the rules of which have been decided by Wizards of the Coast. The integrity of the event is protected by Wizards of the Coast. The final prize is provided by Wizards. And so it doesn't matter that it's a great tournament organizer somewhere that is delivering that experience. So when you think about deploying your competitive ecosystem, don't think you have to do it by yourself. default to the notion that you were going to be working with ecosystem, reach out to the esports team, reach out to the tournament organizations, and figure out what you can do with them first. You'll see that there is an asterisk on execution. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't aspire to try to build the ability to deliver some of that player experience. If you think that at some point in time you're going to be mature enough, your organization is going to be ready to create, say, the top of the pyramid, and you want to run the world championship of your game by yourself, by all means, go for it. And try to learn as you go along. But just don't default to the notion that it's either you own it or it doesn't exist. It's either you do it or you should ignore it. Because, as I mentioned before, if you're successful, your ecosystem will exist whether you like it or not. Rule number 8, in-game items are the only scalable resource for ecosystem development. This is has been my fight in the gaming industry for the last 20 years. Persuading a game team to deploy a dedicated set of resources for ecosystem development that are not going to be sold, that are not going to be given away through mechanics in the game, but are going to be given away through the metagame design is really hard. But it's actually incredibly impactful. And so if there are game designers in the room, if there's people that can make the decisions on how to allocate your pipeline of in-game items and content, keep in mind that you have an ecosystem to care about. And one of the most enlightening things I think you could be doing is to make a conscious decision to dedicate exclusive in-game content to ecosystem development. And this applies to anything, by the way. This is an example that I make for esports, but you could choose to use it to support your streamers. You could, and just have content that you give to streamers to give away to their audience. There's a number of programs and applications that you can use for community and competitive ecosystem development that in-game items are really the only scalable resource you have. Everything else is going to cost a lot of money. It's going to be hard to deliver. As just like you're inflating. You're making the life of people that are developing the ecosystem for you really hard if you don't arm them with this. Rule number 9, resist the online-only temptation. I imagine it comes natural to think that the easiest ways to scale is I make the game and then I build a bunch of tools and maybe I integrate with existing tournament platforms, leagues, and then I just run everything online. And that's great. Like you should be doing that, and that will generate scalability in your competitive systems. Do not ignore IRL. Do not ignore the notion of putting your players, if you can, in the same place, in the same room, whenever you have the opportunity, and it's not cost prohibitive. Wizards of the Coast, again, proves that you can do it at scale if you know what you're doing, if you build great programs. But even beyond Wizards of the Coast, Riot, Blizzard, a number of companies have created great programs that connect. If you think about the fire chats for Hearthstone, or if you think about Pokemon Go and the great community events that, after a couple of initial incidents, they have been able to deliver to their community, that's all examples of companies that understand that their job is well beyond just connecting players online, but building lifestyle for the player community. Once I meet other players, once I decide to play a role in live events, I don't know if you've ever been to a college tournament for any of the known games. The level of professionality on display is mind-blowing. There are these college students that are imagining for themselves event organization, commentating, video production, a number of skills that they are permanently connecting with the games that they have been supporting. So you're building actual communities if you choose to invest on IRL play. I was in a presentation 2 days ago on the status of collegiate esports. And the presenter declared that 35% of every North America League of Legends player is a full-time college student. That's huge, right? And should tell all of us the importance of co-located gaming, the importance of the influence that players can have with each other in developing a competitive scene for a game. Which leads me to point number 10, which is, if you are a Western developer that is thinking about building a game that has ambitions of esports, obviously start with what's familiar, but as you're developing the game, do not forget that the cradle of esports is Asia. And in China, there's 150,000 internet cafes, and that Korea has at every corner an internet cafe where players are gathering around in co-located gaming. That type of ecosystem creates unique opportunities, unique challenges, and as you develop your game, as you're successful and you start thinking, oh, okay, this has potential beyond the West, you should seriously, you should go there. Like, you should figure out how competitive play happens in Asia. You should figure out what partners to work with that are already deploying leagues and tournaments in all these places. You should figure out how to use the existing software to track point systems and leagues. And there's an entire new world, so brave new world for you to explore. Don't miss that opportunity, because it's obviously a huge opportunity. So when you're designing for esports, keep in the back of your mind, one day Asia should be included and you should be building a global game. So I went really fast, which is good. So to conclude, I want to recap a little bit what we said today. I firmly believe that esports is at day one. I firmly believe that while the existing games that are out there have the potential to become evergreens, Magic's been around for 25 years at this point, 26, I guess, and it's bigger than it's ever been. League of Legends has been around forever, 10, 11, I lost track, and nobody's imagining it's gonna go away. Esports is really an engine for permanence. I was at a presentation I was a presentation at South by Southwest by the lead producer of the LCS that now has been called, is basically working with a new football league and helping a new football league to design a new experience for viewers. Esports is now teaching to traditional sports how to engage better with the audience in a more authentic way, with the tools that have been developed. And so I think that what we have discovered in the past 20 years for esports is applicable to the next big esport game. And maybe in this audience somewhere, somebody is designing a game that has the ambition and will have the good fortune to become the next esport game. If I were to design my ideal company that will deliver that, it would follow the principles that you've heard so far. So I would start with changing the culture of the company if it's not already there, and persuading everybody we should be about a player experience, we should not just be delivering a game. And we should build the skill set to not only be able to deliver amazing code, but be able to deal with humans as well. You should then make sure to treat metagame design, the stuff that you're going to be doing with the ecosystem, it needs to be as important as your game design in time. Make a gas-powered game, a game as a service, because you need a constant justification for the permanent investment you will make in esports. Esports has the ambition one day to cost nothing, and you might get there, but there's going to be a long road before you get there. And maybe even some profit at the end of the road, but don't count on that. Treat esports at first as part of the player experience that you are investing in, and you need to build very clear ROI through that engine. And then last, obviously, make it fun to watch so that you can build a viewership experience. Consider Twitch extensions that are a great tool that is still to be explored on how to engage with your audience in more meaningful ways. Do prioritize gameplay understanding, suspense, spectacle, and relatedness. And then lastly, don't forget about the notion of going global. And as you develop your game, keep in mind that co-located gaming is also a great engine for community building, and it's going to be incredibly relevant if you ever decide to expand your game to Asia. If you do all these things, there's a dream company that hopefully exists or will exist. You get a good chance with a good game of living forever and building one sport that you'll not ask yourself whether it will exist 5 or 10 years from now. And this is my talk. Thank you. All right, we have some time for questions, and I think there's a microphone there for the stream.
Hi. You mentioned Rocket League as an excellent example of a game that was immediately obvious what was going on. But it seems like Rocket League is missing the second point, the sort of asymmetric knowledge between the viewers and the players. Is that correct, or am I missing something?
So the asymmetrical knowledge is not a needed ingredient. It is an ingredient that you can factor in if it enhances the player experience. So when I listed, maybe I should have clarified that when I listed all those factors, you don't need to have all of them. Those are the factors you should be considering, but you can skip some, and obviously for Rocket League, full there's not a lot I can think of that would create that asymmetrical experience.
Thank you.
No questions? Anybody?
Obviously, there's Clash Royale and some of these mobile games starting to actually do some of this. How would anything different that you would say for trying to do mobile? Obviously, the huge successes are console, and Twitch doesn't have a lot to watch on there because mobile's not as fun. Just any thoughts you would have mobile specific that would be different from anything you said?
Great question. I'm a big fan of what Supercell has been doing. The best part that has been that they kept on testing, right? Like they did not. You could tell by their experiences that they were creating that they were not like, we know what is best for players and this is what you get. But it was a full rotation of different tournament formats until they detected what. I think that's what mobile is really good at: instrumenting for analytics and testing. I've seen many companies in mobile that's their MO. That's the DNA of a lot of companies in mobile. I wish the rest of the industry would learn from mobile on that front. But in terms of viewership, the one thing that I would do, it's just my pet peeve, but I don't understand why in tournaments they make people sit. That is really sad. I know that it might be a little more uncomfortable to stand, but it would be a much better image for esport if players that are playing an iPad game or they should have a podium and stand rather than sit. I would fix that tomorrow if I could. I keep on tweeting at tournaments my rage. Sorry, that's my pet peeve. I'll have to think about it. I don't have any immediate answer as to what we could be doing for viewership for. But I mean, people are watching esports events on mobile more and more, right? So the viewer experience is restricted already, and I would try to invest more on gaining great broadcasters, getting great professional players, organizing tournaments, and keep on testing formats that the audience would like.
Hey, do you have a position on what the role of the organization should be in tackling like toxicity and exclusivity, particularly in affiliated events?
Yes. When you do affiliated events, you're putting your brand at the forefront, right? Like when I go to a Friday Night Magic or a sanctioned tournament of anybody, that's the publisher that is saying, I guarantee to you the experience. So you have the responsibility as a publisher, if you're sanctioning that event, even though it's organized by somebody else, you're the one whose brand is at stake if there's any element of toxicity or cheating that affects that game. So yes, you need to take full responsibility over the integrity of the system, and I feel like video game companies still have a long way to go in building anti-toxicity systems. The good news is hopefully that a lot of it in the years to come is probably going to be automated. That there's, I've been exposed to tools that seem to be improving on a monthly basis on the way we can tackle toxicity at scale. But again, I feel it's day one. Like when I play League of Legends, I still have to report people, and I don't want to. It's really hard.
Thanks for the talk.
Absolutely. Thank you for
you
coming.
touched on it very briefly at the end when you were talking about this kind of like hypothetical game that might exist in the future. Your kind of dream team putting it together.
Yep.
And you mentioned kind of a timeline, like an esport existing for 5 or 10 years. Do you think that it's possible for a game to kind of become a fixture in parallel to the way that like conventional sports have? Like soccer isn't going anywhere, American football is not going anywhere. I know games are still a pretty young industry, and esports is an even younger kind of subset of that. But do you think that analog is possible, or are video games and esports in some way fundamentally different than regular sports?
I don't think they're fundamentally different. I think that permanence is possible. I think evergreen is possible. I think 25 years for Magic is a pretty good milestone to have reached, and I'm looking forward to the next 25 years that amazing game will have. League of Legends, I don't see moving or going anywhere. Dota, like all these games have done already enough to build a great engine for engagement and rejuvenation of their audience, so to speak, that can attract the next generation. I think that on the participatory side, there's a lot more that can be done in order to achieve that place. And then obviously, as the new generation of humans start growing with video gaming as an obvious sport, I feel that it's going to be more and more. There's going to be even more demand than today for viewership. So there's going to be room for a lot of more sports. It's not going to be like soccer, like sports in which there's literally like 4 or 5 major global sports that are contending the viewership. There's going to be 10. There's going to be 20. But each one of them has a shot at permanence.
Cool. Thanks.
Thank you for the talk. My question actually relates very much to the last question, which is, well, you referred to it, allude to this a little bit in your talk, but what do you think traditional sports can learn from esports in terms of how they present their product, mainly not on site, but like through TV, through kind of online streaming and viewership? Like, what could they learn? Like, what would soccer or football or NBA kind of viewership look like 5, 10 years from now if they're adopting some of the learnings from kind of esports and how that's presented via Twitch and other forms?
Ariel Horn, who was giving the speech at South by Southwest that I mentioned a minute ago, and has been one of the the creative minds behind the evolution of the broadcasting for League of Legends, speaks to this very clearly and indicates as authenticity and direct relationship between players and viewers as the major lesson that traditional sports can learn. If you look at an NFL interview of players, what he was saying was, you don't know really who Tom Brady really is. You don't know who Belichick really is, because there is a system in the NFL which filters, like they have very clear rules on how they engage with the press. There is a PR effort that kind of sanitizes the relationship between them and the fans. I think there is an opportunity for traditional sports to break that barrier. I think there's an opportunity for a more direct interaction between players and viewers. I think social media has already broken a little bit of those barriers, but the rules of traditional sports are still fairly sanitizing. And on one end. On the other hand, obviously, at Twitch, they're experimenting a lot with sports as well. And the notion of having a social channel next to the show, or the ability to jump in and out, the level of stats, the level of depth you want from the viewership experience you're looking at, is something that esports has explored way more than traditional sports. And so if I wear in the shoes of ESPN, I would just spend a lot of time studying how esports has succeeded and try to replicate it. The last bit is that today it's still hard to watch traditional sports sometimes because streaming is still somehow not a thing. and and I don't know why. Like,
Yeah, there are a lot of entities that are not very good at the technology trying to do it.
yeah, exactly. So hopefully that will also impact.
Yeah, so you talked a lot about the importance of metagame systems and competitive systems, but you didn't go too much into what those systems are and like which ones you would prioritize getting into your game first, like rank ladders and common pitfalls with those systems. Do you have any insights on that?
Yes. Step one, I would ask your players, meaning you should have a clear idea of a basic set of systems that you want to build and not assume that you know which one is going to be best for your audience. And so work with your players before you launch the game to prioritize them. So that's going to be like a first good answer. The second pitfall is to over-focus on one tier of players. What I mentioned before is a good process would be to identify what type of audience you want to cater to. And so you'll have, for example, the hyper-competitive player. You'll have the social player that just wants to play with others. You'll have the player that wants to try the wacky game modes, and the player that wants just the standardized and master the standardized play mode. Once you have a map of what your player audience looks like, that's when you can do metagame design. You shouldn't do metagame design before understanding who your audience is. And then, last but not least, obsessively test. Instrument your competitive systems for analytics and keep on figuring out which one work and which don't. Some of the best Magic formats were actually invented by the community. Draft or Rochester Draft, like limited formats of playing trading card games were actually built because and sanctioned by Wizards of the Coast because the community asked them to.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you for the talk.
Absolutely.
I was
Thank you.
curious what your thoughts are on the evolution of esports. So, for example, a sport like soccer, to my knowledge, hasn't really changed a whole lot over the years. Whereas you made the example of Defense of the Ancients, which was a mod. Now it's kind of a standalone game. Do you think we're going to see a lot of that kind of evolution of like, will there be like, a League of Legends 2, for example? Or do you have any thoughts on if that's necessary or possible?
Not only it's possible, but it is necessary. I do believe that esports is predicated on change, and that relates to the business model that we talked about before. It's really hard to build a meaningful gas engine if you don't educate your audience that change is what your game is about. Magic can exist for 25 years and can generate revenue and can build a global ecosystem for competitive play because the rules constantly change. League of Legends can have the same ambition because there's going to be new champions, new mechanics, and the lessons that you keep on teaching your audience is this is not the game you played last year. So it's because of the business model that it's going to be really hard for a game that does not change to gain permanence. Like there's going to be some, but there's not going to be a lot of investment on that game, and that will prevent that game to thrive in time. So I would always embrace a game that from day one teaches the audience the game you play 2 months from now is not going to be the same game you're playing now.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Hi, I'm super inspired by your talk.
Thank you.
I was just wondering if you could give some grassroots examples of things that you had done in video games.
Yep, absolutely. So I'm in love with the college scene, in case it was not obvious. So both a Blizzard and a Riot started a collegiate program and invested a lot on that collegiate program. I find the energy and the passion of that grassroots scene to be contagious and formative for an entire class of students. I think you're accomplishing at the same time, you're building a great base of grassroots players for your game, but you're actually empowering future professionals in discovering things that they're passionate about. My career has been just entirely predicated on the fact that I just found out very early that all I could do was games, and that simplified things from day one. when you invest on collegiate competitive play, you are basically giving a shot at a number of other young people like I was to find their track in a very lucrative, very meaningful, both creative and scientific, like data-driven market. So there's room for everybody in game making, and so collegiate programs have been a lot of my passion. I've been fostering sanctioned tournament play, which would basically allow anybody globally to apply to become a tournament organizer for League of Legends, and then get rewarded for running tournaments. And most of my career at Wizards of the Coast was all grassroots competitive play. Like whether it was the Harry Potter League, I did a Beyblade League when I was in Italy, like literally with kids playing with the stadiums and spinning tops. Grassroots is where my heart is at. Although, of course, like the professional tier is critical, and I've had a lot of fun with that too. All right. Thank you so much for coming today.